It's the end of World War II, and Britain just exhausted all of their military fighting Germany for the second time of the century, and it's safe to say they weren't in the best place afterwards. So a little bit of backstory. Understandably, getting invaded and occupied by some pessimistic twats from Europe wouldn't be the best of things for your native tribe, but it's in times like those where there's only one thing you can do. Unite with the other local tribes even though you don't share a language and have almost no cultural similarities, but a class is the same based on some arbitrary border drawn with a ruler without regard for the locals' opinions to form a government and declare independence. TLDR.
Independence.
That's exactly what Egypt did in 1953, and because of pressure from the UN and the fact that the British didn't have the strength to stop them, they had to do it peacefully. But as one last collective fuck you to Egypt, Britain kept the Suez Canal. This pissed off the president of Egypt quite a lot, so he nationalised the Suez Canal and took it from the British. This all led to a series of events that caused Britain, France and Israel to invade Egypt, but after severe international backlash they all pulled out. Several years passed, and by this point some weird stuff had happened. Egypt and Syria unified, the Soviets started supporting the Arabs, and the Americans started supporting the Israelis. Even a few of the Arab nations got together and signed a defence pact. Things generally just got a bit confusing. Then one day, the Egyptians received false military intelligence stating that Israeli troops were readying for a war with Syria. Egyptian president and all-around mad lad Gamal Nasser started protecting his border with Israel. They also kicked out a bunch of UN soldiers along the way. Then the Egyptian Navy began a blockade of Israeli ships at the Straits of Tiran near the Suez Canal. The Israelis knew that they were at the disadvantage, so they used the element of surprise. On the 5th of June 1968, the Israeli Air Force started a bombing campaign of Egypt's airfields, crippling the Egyptian Air Force. Meanwhile, Israeli troops crossed the border and marched into the Sinai Desert, bamboozling the Egyptians again by taking the unexpected route. The next day, they took Gaza and had completed the conquest by the 8th. Jordan saw this invasion and presumably several panic attacks happened back at HQ, so they hastily started firing shells at Israel. Unfortunately though, this only stirred up the hive, and now that the bulk of the army was freed up, the Israeli Air Force and ground troops could push into the West Bank, capturing Jerusalem on the way. 2 down, 1 to go. Syria had launched a few ineffective attacks against Israel, so by the time Egypt and Jordan had been dealt with, they launched the Golan Heights campaign, where Israelis often found themselves pushing into fortified high ground positions and still coming out victorious due to air superiority and poor Syrian leadership. By this point, the war had effectively ended after 6 days. There were still a few squabbles to be had, but in August 1970 a ceasefire was agreed. And they all lived happily ever after. There was prosperity for generations to come, and there was never, ever another Arab-Israeli war. Ever.